Welcome to SLUMBERVERSE! Oh gee, another dimension of naps!
Hey there, sleepyheads, glad to have you back. Before we slip into tonight's tale, I'd love to know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. On the night the sky learned a new color, Luna found the child sleeping between a crate of music boxes and a stack of maps that no one had unfolded in years. The aurora had been dancing for 3 days straight, painting the town in sheets of emerald and gold, and most folks had grown weary of the spectacle. But Luna couldn't sleep. She'd been drawn to her shop by something like wind chimes made of whispers, and when she unlocked the back door with fingers stiff from cold, there they were, curled among silk scarves and forgotten treasures as if they'd been born there. The child couldn't have been more than 7, with hair the color of autumn leaves and clothes that seemed handmade from no fabric Luna recognized. Soft and silvery, almost like they were woven from captured starlight. The garments held a faint luminescence that made the child appear to glow gently in the aurora's shifting light. What struck Luna most wasn't the mystery of how they'd gotten there, but how right they looked among her collection of sleeping wonders. She knelt beside them, old joints creaking like familiar floorboards, and felt something shift in the room's deep hum. The music boxes around the child were vibrating with faint internal melodies, not playing their songs, but remembering them. The ceramic birds on nearby shelves, silent for decades, held an almost imperceptible tremor, as if stirring from dreams of flight. It wasn't that broken things were fixing themselves. It was subtler, more profound. The child's presence seemed to gently remind each object of its own inner life, coaxing sleeping things to remember they were once awake. When the child's eyes opened, they were the deep green of forest pools, ancient and knowing in a way that made Luna feel like she was the one just awakening. No surprise flickered across their features at finding themselves in a stranger's shop. No tears or calls for parents? Instead, they sat up slowly, placed a small hand on the nearest music box and whispered, "Hello, little world. I've been waiting to meet you." Luna watched as the music box responded with something entirely new, not its usual tinkling melody, but a song that seemed to come from the very heart of the tiny dancers, frozen inside. Gentle, acknowledging, like recognition between old friends. "I'm River," the child said, their voice carrying the same quality as the music box's new song, soft, clear, somehow familiar, even though Luna was certain she'd never heard it before. "I think I've been looking for you." Luna felt a door opening in her chest that she hadn't realized was closed. For 40 years she'd collected these broken toys and forgotten treasures, telling herself she was preserving memories. But sitting there in the green glow of the aurora, watching this strange child commune with her silent collection, she understood she'd been preparing all along. "Well then," Luna said, her voice steady despite the wonder blooming inside her, "I suppose we'd better get you some proper breakfast and warmer clothes. These little worlds you're greeting have been waiting a long time for someone who knows how to say hello properly." River smiled, an expression that seemed to light up not just their face, but the entire room. And Luna felt her own heart beginning to hum, with the same gentle frequency as the awakening music boxes. Those first days moved with the quiet rhythm of a lullaby, with more rests than notes. River napped in sun puddles as if sunlight were a place you could travel to, and wherever they rested, nearby objects softened into themselves. The cracked globe lamp found a way to glow without showing its wounds. The jar of sea glass hummed, not music exactly, but the feeling you get when someone you love says your name in another room. Luna made toast buttered in generous arcs, eggs that chose exactly the right softness, cocoa in chipped mugs painted with clouds. River ate with attentive calm, as if eating were also a way to listen. When they finished, Luna guided them through narrow aisles where each shelf held chapters of someone's former life. River reached out occasionally, not touching, just letting their fingers hover. With each pause, something subtle happened. A pocket watch decided to beat for 3 brave seconds. A porcelain cup released the scent of summer picnics. Postcards blushed with memories of loving hands. "Do you feel them?" Luna asked, offering shared language. River's head tilted the way cats listen to tin roofs. "They're not broken," they said with quiet certainty. "They're asleep." Luna saw then that her first guess had been right. The world had placed this child in her care the way the sea sets a shell at someone's feet. Not a gift to own, but a responsibility to meet with both hands open. At night, After simple soup and long, comfortable pauses, Luna told stories of how the shop had come to her, how every lost thing carried clever threads back to heartbeats. River listened with serious eyes, as if each sentence were a room they were learning to navigate. When Luna's stories ended, River spoke of the music boxes with gentle wisdom that seemed ancient in such a small voice. "They're not waiting for winding," River said, fingers making small circles in the air. "They're waiting for someone to help them remember the dance starts with a breath." There was tenderness in their certainty that didn't insist but invited. Luna thought of all the years she'd mended, what could be mended, and comforted what could not, recognizing that this child moved in that narrow space where repair and reverence overlapped. The strongest force here wasn't force at all. Outside, the aurora continued its patient dance, but inside the curiosity shop, a different kind of magic was beginning, the kind that grows slowly like trust, like the understanding that some gifts arrive exactly when they're meant to, wrapped in mystery and delivered by forces too gentle to name. Morning arrived like a gentle conversation between light and shadow, slipping through the shop's old curtains to find River already awake among the music boxes, their small fingers tracing patterns in the dust motes that danced in the early rays. Luna moved quietly through her morning ritual, setting water to boil and opening curtains one at a time, allowing the day to enter slowly, respectfully. The aurora had faded to whispers at the horizon, but something of its magic lingered in the way River approached each sleeping treasure. Luna became River's first teacher in the art of patient attention, though neither of them thought of it as teaching. They simply shared the work of tending, moving through narrow aisles where each shelf held chapters of someone's former life. Together they developed a rhythm as natural as breathing. Approach slowly. Ask permission with presence rather than words. Listen before attempting to awaken. "This one," Luna would say, placing a tarnished music box in River's small hands, once sat on a dresser where someone brushed their hair each night, humming songs their grandmother had taught them. She offered these stories not as instruction, but as gentle currents for River's intuition to follow. River would close their eyes, breathing slowly, their chest rising and falling with ancient calm. What Luna observed in those quiet moments wasn't power in any dramatic sense, but something far more profound. When River's hands rested on a silent music box, they weren't forcing life back into dormant mechanisms. They were listening to the tiny world within, miniature dancers waiting for their cue, clockwork hearts that beat in rhythm with hope and quiet longing. River could sense the delicate architecture of memory, the faint whispers of past joy that clung to brass and wood like invisible fingerprints on the soul of things. Every object was once loved by someone, Luna explained, her fingers tracing the worn edge of a ceramic bird. And that love doesn't just vanish, it leaves traces, like warmth that lingers in a room after someone kind has been there. She taught River that these traces were the true geography of each treasure. A chipped teacup held not just the memory of tea, but of conversations and comfort. A faded photograph wasn't just paper and ink, but a window into a moment so intensely lived that its echo could still be felt decades later. River learned to approach each object with the reverence of someone entering a cathedral. They understood that silence wasn't emptiness, but a form of deep rest, a quiet holding of inner narratives. Instead of trying to wake things fully, River would simply sit with them, acknowledging their presence, offering gentle recognition to the tiny civilizations that flourished in the warm spaces between a book's pages. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday afternoon when River approached a music box that had been completely silent for over 20 years. Its painted flowers had faded to whispers of their former colors, and no amount of winding had ever coaxed a single note from its mechanisms. River sat with it for a long time, hands resting lightly on its surface, breathing synchronized with some rhythm Luna couldn't detect. When the first notes finally emerged, they weren't the mechanical tinkling Luna expected, but something far more profound, a melody that seemed to carry the weight of every lullaby ever hummed, every moment of tenderness that had ever existed in the presence of music. The song wasn't just beautiful, it was complete, as if the music box had been saving this perfect melody for exactly this moment, for exactly these listeners who would understand its true value. "How?" Luna whispered, When the music finally faded into contented silence, River looked up with eyes that held depths beyond their years. I asked it what it most wanted to sing, and then I listened until I could hear the answer. In the evenings, River began drawing in a small notebook Luna found tucked between old letters, soft constellations connecting objects across the shop, mapping the paths along which attention traveled, the pages filled with wavering lines that seemed to chart how listening moved, how recognition flowed between sleeping things and patient hearts. Luna found herself changing in response to River's gentle teachings. Her movements through the shop became more deliberate, more respectful. She began greeting her collection each morning, not with words but with a quality of attention that acknowledged their individual presence. The shop itself seemed to respond, its atmosphere growing warmer, as if the building was remembering how to breathe. Some objects chose to remain quiet, and River learned to honor that choice. A ceramic bird with a chipped beak held its silence like a chosen blanket, and River would simply stand nearby, offering companionship to its quiet. Some songs are nests, River told Luna. They don't want wind. As winter deepened and the first letter from the school arrived, Luna understood that their sanctuary of sleeping wonders was preparing to send its young guardian out into a world that moved faster and asked louder questions. But watching River trace gentle paths between music boxes and snow globes, she felt certain that some gifts were too precious to be diminished by fluorescent lights or hurried schedules. The language they had learned together, the dialect of patience and presence, would travel wherever River needed to go, carried in small hands that knew how to listen to the secret songs of sleeping. Things. The first day of school arrived with the sharp brightness of fluorescent lights and the particular hum of a building designed for efficiency rather than wonder. River walked through doors that opened onto hallways, smelling of floor polish and fresh paper, where lockers clanged like small thunder and voices moved in currents too quick for careful listening. The contrast with Luna's gentle shop felt like stepping from a lullaby into a marching song, and River moved slowly, as if carrying something fragile that might spill. In the classroom, desks stood in neat rows under lights that buzzed with an almost aggressive energy. River found a seat near the window, where dust motes performed their endless dance, and within minutes felt the overwhelming chorus of silent stories that surrounded them. Every pencil held memories of words written and erased. Each textbook whispered of countless readers who had traced its pages, and even the classroom clock ticked with the accumulated weight of all the moments it had measured. The cacophony of unspoken histories made the teacher's voice seem distant, like sound traveling through water. River learned to navigate by finding pockets of quiet in the storm of stimulation. During lunch, they discovered a courtyard where an old maple tree offered shade, and the particular kind of silence that comes from growing things. They ate slowly, sharing crumbs with a sparrow who approached without fear, as if recognizing a kindred spirit who understood the value of unhurried attention. But it was the art room that became River's true sanctuary. This space breathed differently than the rest of the school, filled with the earthy sense of clay and paint, where broken crayons gathered like refugees and forgotten paintbrushes waited with patient dignity. The teacher, Mr. Sage, moved through his domain with paint-stained fingers and eyes that held the gentle wisdom of someone who understood that creativity couldn't be rushed or commanded. Mr. Sage noticed how River gravitated toward the discarded supplies that other students avoided, the dried watercolor cakes, the markers with broken tips, the brushes whose bristles had grown wild with age. He watched as River would sit quietly among these forgotten tools, breathing slowly, while their fingers traced gentle patterns in the air above each sleeping treasure. The watercolors would remember their capacity for flowing, the broken crayons would discover new ways to leave their mark, and the old brushes would find unexpected grace in their imperfection. "Take your time," Mr. Sage would say, his voice carrying the same patient quality as Luna's. "Everything here has been more than one thing, and it will be more again." River began creating what they thought of as listening maps, not conventional drawings, but intricate patterns that somehow captured the inner geographies they discovered in their communion with art supplies. A ceramic cup revealed dreamscapes of rolling hills, where morning light always fell perfectly. Music boxes unveiled weather patterns within their tiny worlds, gentle breezes of nostalgia, sudden gusts of forgotten joy, the quiet, steady rain of wistful longing. Even the books held secret territories, tiny civilizations flourishing in the warm spaces between pages, miniature libraries of whispered thoughts, bustling marketplaces where ideas were exchanged like precious currency. Mr. Sage found himself changing in response to River's presence. He began saving supplies that other classes would have discarded, creating a special corner that became known as River's workshop. He watched his understanding of teaching transform as he learned to see his role not as someone who provided tools for consumption, but as a curator of possibilities, someone who could recognize when seemingly used-up things still held the capacity for wonder. Other students began to gather around River's workspace, drawn by something they couldn't name. They watched in quiet fascination as River transformed the art room's forgotten materials into windows onto hidden worlds. Some asked to help, and River would guide their hands to hover over broken supplies, teaching them to listen for the faint hum of possibility that lived in all things. "Everyone can hear it," River told a shy girl named Emma, who had been convinced she had no artistic talent. "You just have to get very quiet and remember that everything wants to be part of something beautiful." As autumn deepened, River's maps began filling the art room walls, each one a testament to the secret geographies that existed parallel to the visible world. Students from other classes requested permission to visit during free periods, standing quietly before River's listening maps, as if they were windows into dreams they had forgotten they once had. One afternoon, as golden light slanted through the art room windows, Mr. Sage placed a small brass key on River's workspace. "If the lights are too loud some mornings," he said quietly, "you may come early. The sun opens these windows before the building wakes." River accepted the key with the same reverence they showed the music boxes, understanding that trust, like attention, was something to be received with both hands open. In the gentle weight of worn brass, they felt the echo of all the doors it had opened, all the quiet mornings it had unlocked, and knew that their map of the school's hidden territories had just expanded to include the sacred geography of early light and patient solitude. Evening found River back in Luna's shop, drawing soft constellations in their notebook, lines connecting the art room to the courtyard maple, the workshop corner to the windowsill where bottles caught afternoon sun. They were learning that maps could be drawn between people too, invisible threads of understanding that connected hearts across the spaces where patience met recognition, where listening became a form of love. The brass key opened more than just the art room door. It unlocked mornings that moved like whispered prayers, when River could slip into the building before it learned to buzz with urgency. In that sacred hour before dawn fully committed to day, the art room breathed differently. Sunlight entered through tall windows, like honey poured slowly, settling on tables and easels with the patience of something that understood the value of gentle arrival. River would sit among the sleeping art supplies, hands hovering over dried watercolor cakes and forgotten brushes, listening to their quiet dreams of color and creation. It was during one of these morning sanctuaries that River first encountered the child who would become their closest friend and most trusted translator. Sage moved through the early light like someone who had learned to walk in harmony with silence, their storm-gray eyes holding the same quality of deep attention that River recognized in their own reflection. They found Sage carefully arranging fallen leaves by the tall window, not by size or type, but by some inner logic that spoke to the subtle gradations of autumn's poetry. The introduction came through a single leaf placed gently on River's workspace, a maple leaf, the color of burnished gold, its edges traced with the finest lines of crimson. Sage approached with the careful reverence of someone who understood that sacred work required invitation rather than intrusion. "The leaf wanted to meet you," Sage said simply, their voice carrying the unhurried cadence of autumn rain. "It told me it had been waiting all morning to find the right hands." River lifted the leaf with fingers that had learned to hold fragile things as if they were made of crystallized light. In its surface, they could sense the entire story of its becoming, the slow unfurling of spring, the deep contentment of summer growth, the gradual transformation into autumn glory, and finally the brave letting go that had brought it to this moment. But more than the leaf's individual journey, River felt the vast network of connection that linked this single treasure to every tree, every season, every conversation between earth and sky. "It's not just the leaf," River whispered, wonder softening their voice. "It's the whole conversation between earth and sky." From that moment, Sage became River's witness and gentle translator, someone who could help others understand that River didn't possess some mystical power, but had simply cultivated a quality of attention so refined that it could perceive the subtle energies moving through all things. Their friendship grew not from shared games or boisterous laughter, but from shared silences and the mutual understanding that the world was far more magical than most people remembered to notice. Together they began exploring the small, overlooked spaces that existed parallel to the school's official geography. Sage would collect fallen treasures, leaves that whispered stories of the trees they had loved, feathers that carried wind from distant places, stones worn smooth by patient water, while River sat quietly, hands resting on earth or bark, listening to conversations happening in languages older than words. They discovered that River's ability extended far beyond objects to encompass the forgotten corners, where wonder gathered like light in prisms, the windowsill where dust motes performed their endless ballet, the space between raindrops where silence lived and breathed, the corner where afternoon sun pooled like liquid gold. During lunch periods, they claimed the courtyard's ancient maple tree as their sanctuary. River would rest both hands on the gnarled bark, sensing the tree's patient awareness of seasons cycling like breath, its generous offering of shade, and the particular peace that comes from beings who have learned to grow slowly and give freely. Sage would settle nearby, often with their worn notebook, documenting not facts but feelings, the way light shifted through leaves, the small ceremonies of birds and insects, the subtle changes that marked time's gentle passage. "You don't make them sing," Sage observed one afternoon, watching River commune with a silent music box that had found its way to their shared workspace. "They'll just remind them they can." This simple recognition felt like a soft key turning in a lock River hadn't realized was there. Sage understood that River's gift wasn't about fixing or forcing, but about offering a quality of presence that allowed sleeping things to remember their own capacity for wonder. When classmates gathered around River's workspace, drawn by something they couldn't name, Sage would quietly explain that everyone carried this capacity for deep listening, that River was simply someone who had learned to trust what their heart could hear when the world grew quiet enough. Their friendship became a living map of patient attention, two souls who had found each other across the vast geography of human experience. Sage helped River understand that recognition itself was a form of blessing, that the simple act of truly seeing could awaken dormant possibilities in both observer and observed. They practiced this gentle attention on everything around them, how afternoon light transformed ordinary hallways into galleries of shadow and gold, the way forgotten corners held pockets of wild beauty where life persisted with stubborn hope. "Sometimes it's enough just to say hello," Sage told River one afternoon, as they watched clouds reshape themselves against infinite blue. This became their shared philosophy. That acknowledgement was its own form of magic. That wonder was always available to those who knew how to look with patient eyes. As autumn deepened into winter's approach, River realized they had discovered something as precious as their gift for awakening sleeping things, a companion who could witness their wonder without trying to possess or explain it, someone who understood that the most profound magic often happened in the spaces between words, in the quiet moments when two souls recognized each other across the beautiful complexity of existence. Back in Luna's shop each evening, River would add new constellations to their notebook, soft lines connecting the art room to the courtyard maple, the morning sanctuary to the afternoon light, and most importantly, the invisible threads that linked their heart to Sage's understanding. They were learning that maps could be drawn between people too. That friendship itself was a form of sacred geography, where patience met recognition, where listening became its own form of love. Winter deepened around them like a gentle embrace, and with it came River's first profound lesson in the sacred weight of their gift. The morning light filtered through frost-painted windows in the art room, where River sat among sleeping supplies that had grown familiar as old friends. But when they reached toward a small ceramic bird that had rested on the third shelf of Luna's shop for longer than anyone could remember, something in the quality of silence made them pause. The bird had been donated by a family clearing their grandmother's belongings, and it carried within its faded blue glaze the particular quiet that comes not from neglect, but from choice. As River's awareness brushed against the tiny world within, they felt not the usual gentle stirring of dormant wonder, but something deeper, a profound contentment in stillness, a deliberate retreat from song that spoke of wisdom rather than weariness. River's hands trembled as understanding dawned like morning light through curtains. The ceramic bird's silence wasn't sleep waiting for awakening. It was sanctuary, carefully chosen and tenderly maintained. Its inner world thrived in quietude, complete in its own rhythm that required no external validation. To disturb such peace would be like waking someone from a perfect dream simply to announce the sunrise, when they were already content in their chosen rest. That evening, River sat with Luna in the shop's back room, the ceramic bird between them on the worn wooden table. The weight of new understanding settled around River's shoulders like a shawl woven from moonlight and responsibility. "I felt its choice," River said softly, their voice carrying the particular gravity that comes from encountering mystery that cannot be easily resolved. "It wants to stay quiet. It's not broken or forgotten, it's resting on purpose." Luna's eyes held the gentle light of someone who had been waiting for this moment since the first night she found River among the music boxes. She had known that true gifts always arrived paired with equally profound responsibilities. That power without wisdom was like fire without a hearth, beautiful but potentially destructive. "What did you do?" Luna asked, settling into her chair with the careful attention of a gardener tending a seedling at a crucial stage of growth. "I asked if it wanted to stay quiet," River replied, their fingers tracing gentle patterns in the air above the ceramic bird. "And when it said yes, I told it that was beautiful too." Luna smiled with the warmth of someone witnessing a child take their first steps into a larger understanding of the world. "You've discovered the most important part of your gift," she said, her voice carrying the patient cadence of ancient wisdom. "True power lies not in the ability to awaken, but in the wisdom to know when to let sleeping things lie. Some quiet is shelter, River. Some silence is a song that chooses to remain unsung." From that day forward, River's practice transformed entirely. Before approaching any object, before allowing their consciousness to drift toward hidden worlds, they learned to pause and offer a silent question, not with words, but with a quality of presence that invited rather than intruded. Sometimes the answer flowed like warm honey, eager and welcoming. Other times it arrived as gentle resistance, a soft boundary that spoke of contentment in chosen solitude. Sage noticed the change immediately, recognizing the particular depth that comes from encountering ethical complexity. During their shared lunches under the maple tree, River spoke of learning to listen, not just to what things wanted to become, but to what they needed to remain. "You're hearing the space between the whispers now," Sage observed, watching River carefully return a faded photograph to its shelf without touching it, having sensed its deep, self-contained grief that asked only for respectful witness. "Some music boxes hold silence like a prayer," River explained, their words carrying new precision. "And some prayers aren't meant to be answered, they're meant to be held." The lesson deepened when a woman with silver hair and eyes that had learned to hold tears without letting them fall brought a velvet-lined box to the shop. Inside lay her mother's music box, roses painted along its edges, gold worn thin by decades of loving touch. "It used to play a lullaby when I couldn't sleep," she said, hope and sorrow braided together in her voice. "I haven't heard it in 20 years. River opened the case and felt the music box's gentle tiredness, its desire to rest while still honoring the love it had witnessed. Instead of trying to coax song from its mechanisms, River began to hum, not the melody the box would have played, but a lullaby shaped by the woman's own heartbeat, the rhythm of nights when patience borrowed its tempo from the moon itself. The woman's tears finally found their path as recognition bloomed across her face. "That's it," she whispered. "That's the one." The music box remained peacefully silent, and the woman left carrying nothing new and everything she had come seeking. River understood then that their role was not to fix or force, but to serve as a bridge between what was and what was needed, allowing each encounter to unfold according to its own sacred logic. Back in the art room, Mr. Sage placed a cracked ceramic cup before River and asked the class to draw it. River set aside their pencil and stared at the space above the crack until their breathing aligned with the cup's quiet dignity. On paper, they drew not the cup but the gentle valley of emptiness, where the crack had created new geography, a shape of nothing that felt like something. Held with infinite care, winter's longest night arrived with the particular peace that comes from darkness fully embraced. River sat surrounded by objects that had chosen various relationships with consciousness, some humming gently, with reawakened life, others resting in honored silence, all of them held within the expanding geography of River's compassionate attention. In their notebook, they drew new constellations that included the sacred territories of deliberate quiet, mapping rest as carefully as they charted song. They were learning that mastery of their gift would require not just the ability to listen, but the wisdom to know when listening itself was enough, when presence was the highest form of service, and when love meant allowing things to remain exactly as they chose to be. The ceramic bird continued its peaceful rest on Luna's shelf, and River visited it each day, not to awaken, but to offer companionship to its chosen silence, understanding finally that witness itself could be a form of blessing, and that some of the most profound magic happened in the spaces where patience met reverence, where power learned to serve rather than command. Spring arrived with the particular grace of snow, learning to become water, carrying with it the profound lesson River had learned about honoring chosen silence. The ceramic bird continued its peaceful rest on Luna's shelf, and River visited it each morning, not to awaken, but to offer companionship to its deliberate quiet. It was into this atmosphere of deepened reverence that the old clockmaker arrived, drawn by something he claimed only certain ears could detect. Ezra appeared at Luna's shop on a morning when frost still painted delicate patterns on the windows, his arms cradling a worn leather case that held the gentle weight of timepieces that had chosen rest over rhythm. He was tall in the way of old trees, with silver hair that caught light like captured moonbeams and hands that moved with the deliberate precision of someone who had spent decades coaxing time itself into cooperation. His coat carried the faint scent of oil and winter air, and his eyes held the patient depth of accumulated wisdom. "I repair clocks that stop not from breaking, but from being tired," he said to Luna, his voice carrying the even cadence of a metronome set to a heartbeat. When he opened his case to reveal a collection of silent timepieces nested in velvet, worn soft by countless careful handlings, River felt the familiar stirring that came from encountering kindred spirits across the vast geography of human understanding. Each timepiece held its own story of faithful service, a pocket watch that had measured a grandfather's lifetime of gentle mornings, a mantel clock that had chimed through decades of family dinners, a delicate wristwatch that had counted heartbeats through both sorrow and celebration, until it finally chose the profound rest that comes after a life well lived. River approached with the reverence they had learned to bring to all encounters with sleeping things, sensing immediately that these weren't simply broken mechanisms, but souls that had earned their silence. "You feel what most people miss," Ezra observed, watching River's careful communion with his collection. "Not only the tick, but the space that holds it. You're a world tender, child, one of the few who remember that every object carries its own geography, its own spirit that requires not fixing, but tending." The word world tender resonated within River like a forgotten melody suddenly remembered, giving language to something ineffable and placing their gift within an ancient tradition of those who served as bridges between seen and unseen realms. Ezra explained that world tenders weren't magicians who controlled, but conduits who listened. Some worked with growing things, others with elements, still others with the dreams that lived in stone and metal. River's calling seemed to be with the forgotten and overlooked, the small treasures that held large love. "Let me show you an older way of listening," Ezra said, settling into the chair Luna offered. "It helps with time because time is proud. It likes to be asked with care." They began with breath because everything good did. Ezra's method felt both familiar and new. 3 slow inhalations like opening shutters, 3 exhalations like laying blankets back down. "On the 4th breath," he instructed gently, "notice the seam where wanting to hear turns into hearing. Stop there. That doorway is where worlds meet." River felt it. A thin, generous threshold inside the chest, a hush that was not empty, but full of possibility. In that space, The pocket watch's inner world came into view without images, only a sense of moments holding their coats in a waiting room, glancing up when River's attention entered, with curious welcome rather than startled alarm. River didn't speak to them, and they didn't speak back. Presence did the speaking. A single tick sounded soft as a blink. "Good," Ezra said, as if they had both witnessed a bird land. "We are not here to make it perform. We are here to remind it of its own rhythm, and then let it decide." Under Ezra's gentle guidance, River learned ethical frameworks that had been passed down through generations of careful practice. "Consent is first, patience second, discernment third," he explained. "Intervention, when invited, comes after. Your gift isn't rare, but your willingness to cultivate it with wisdom, that's precious beyond measure." Sage appeared at the doorway during one of these sessions, drawn by the quality of attention that seemed to transform the very air. Seeing their interest, Ezra nodded them closer. "Translators are world tenders too. You help people hear what they already know." As evening painted the shop in shades of gold and amber, River understood that they were no longer a solitary practitioner of mysterious gifts, but part of a gentle conspiracy of souls, dedicated to tending the overlooked corners, where wonder gathered like light in forgotten windows. Their notebook gained new constellations that night, soft lines connecting not just objects, but the vast network of world tenders across time and space, all united in the sacred work of listening with love. The deeper understanding that flowed from Ezra's teachings settled into River's days like morning light, finding its way through familiar windows, each lesson becoming part of the natural rhythm that governed their communion with sleeping worlds. The clockmaker's presence had transformed the shop into something approaching a sanctuary, where the ancient tradition of world tending could be practiced with the reverence it deserved. It was into this atmosphere of deepened wisdom that Maya arrived, drawn by what she later described as the sound of colors learning to sing. She appeared at the shop's doorway on an afternoon when spring light painted everything in shades of honey and gold, her dark hair caught in a loose braid, threaded with paintbrush handles like flowers in a casual bouquet. In her arms, she carried a worn leather portfolio that seemed to pulse with gentle luminescence, and her fingers bore the telltale stains of someone who spent mornings translating invisible worlds into visible beauty. Maya moved through the shop's narrow aisles with the careful attention River recognized in their own approach to sleeping things, her gaze offering acknowledgement without demand. "I paint what objects dream," she said simply when Luna asked about her visit, her voice carrying the particular cadence of someone who had learned to speak in the spaces between heartbeats. "And I heard there's someone here who can listen to those dreams directly." When Maya opened her portfolio, River felt the familiar stirring that came from encountering kindred spirits across the vast geography of human understanding. Her paintings revealed themselves like secrets shared between trusted friends, watercolor portraits of the bustling marketplace that lived inside a jewelry box, complete with miniature lanterns casting soft glows over stalls, laden with whispered dreams. Within a pocket watch, narrow staircases curled around a central shaft of gold, and small windows opened to dawns that never ended. A cracked ceramic bowl contained an eternal shoreline where waves arrived with tender regularity, as if teaching patience to the sand. "How do you see them?" River asked, studying a painting that depicted the delicate ecosystem thriving inside a thimble. Tiny flowers blooming in perpetual spring, butterflies no larger than dust motes, a sun that shifted through endless variations of gentle warmth. "The same way you hear them, I think," Maya replied, settling cross-legged on the floor beside River's workspace. "I get very quiet and ask what wants to be seen. Then I wait until my hands remember how to paint what my heart already knows." Their collaboration began organically, like two streams finding their way to the same river. River would commune with an object until its inner geography became clear, then describe the landscapes they discovered in language soft enough not to disturb the delicate ecosystems within. Maya would listen with the focused attention of someone translating between realms, her brush moving across paper with movements that seemed choreographed by invisible dancers. Together, they created what they called maps of the invisible, transforming Luna's shop into a gallery where visitors could experience glimpses of the hidden, worlds that flourished parallel to ordinary sight. Each piece captured not just the visual elements of these inner realms, but their emotional weather, the golden nostalgia that pooled in music box corners, the silver anticipation that shimmered around clockwork dances, the deep contentment that radiated from well-loved objects at rest. What grew between River and Maya was not sudden flame, but a steady hearth, their connection deepening through shared reverence for the sacred nature of their work. Maya's touch carried the same gentle precision River brought to their listening, her presence a comforting echo in the vast spaces of River's inner landscape. They spent hours in companionable silence, River sensing while Maya painted, their hearts beating in a rhythm that felt both ancient and entirely new. Love itself is a form of world-building, Maya said one evening, as they watched dust motes perform their endless ballet in the last light filtering through the shop's windows. Every time two souls truly see each other, they create a space where both can flourish. This understanding became the foundation of their relationship, not dramatic passion, but the slow, careful cultivation of a shared territory where both their gifts could interweave and strengthen. Maya's paintings began incorporating elements that only River could perceive, while River's listening deepened through Maya's visual translations of the worlds they discovered together. When they hosted their first exhibition, townspeople moved through the transformed shop with a new kind of quietude, their eyes wide with gentle wonder. A grandmother wept before Maya's painting of her music box's inner realm, recognizing the tiny ballroom where her own childhood dreams still waltzed to melodies she had thought were lost forever. A young father stood mesmerized by the painting of his son's toy train's secret journey through landscapes of pure possibility. Ezra, observing their partnership with the quiet satisfaction of a master, watching students discover their own mastery, nodded approvingly. True world tenders often work in pairs, he told them. One to listen, one to translate, both to hold the sacred space where invisible becomes visible. As spring deepened toward summer, River understood that their gift had evolved beyond individual practice into something collaborative and expansive. The maps they created with Maya weren't just artistic expressions, but invitations for others to remember their own capacity for wonder, gentle doorways through which visitors could glimpse the vast territories of magic that existed parallel to ordinary perception. Their love grew like their art, slowly, carefully, with the deep roots that come from souls who recognize each other across the beautiful complexity of existence. The gentle success of Maps of the Invisible drew visitors whose needs extended far beyond artistic appreciation, their footsteps carrying the particular weight of parents who had watched their children retreat into inner worlds that felt safer than the outer one. It was Dr. Sarah Chen who first articulated what Luna and River had begun to sense, that their gift for awakening sleeping objects might offer a different kind of healing, for souls who had learned to protect themselves through carefully chosen silence. Dr. Chen appeared at the shop on a morning when summer light painted everything in shades of honey and possibility, her professional demeanor softened by eyes that held the particular exhaustion of someone who worked with wounded hearts. She moved through the exhibition with the careful attention River recognized in their own approach to fragile things, pausing longest before Maya's painting of a music box's inner world, depicted not as damaged, but as courageously rebuilding, tiny figures working together to repair bridges of melody. "I work with children who have experienced trauma," she said when Luna made introductions, her voice carrying the measured cadence of someone who chose words like stepping stones across swift water. "Some have stopped speaking entirely, retreating into inner landscapes that feel safer than anything external. I wondered if your gift might offer recognition rather than intervention, showing them that their inner worlds, however defended, still hold possibilities for wonder." River felt the familiar stirring that came from encountering new applications of their calling, but also a weight of responsibility that settled around their shoulders like a shawl woven from moonlight and prayer. Working with objects that chose silence was one thing. Approaching the wounded territories of children's hearts required a level of care that made their previous ethical considerations seem gentle by comparison. The first child Dr. Chen brought was Emma, 8 years old with eyes that held depths no child should have to navigate alone. She moved through the world like someone carrying something invisible and infinitely fragile, her steps careful and her voice reduced to whispers that barely disturbed the air. When River sat beside her in the shop's quietest corner, they felt the vast geography of Emma's inner world, not broken but carefully fortified, with high walls built from necessity and bridges that had been deliberately burned to prevent further invasion. River didn't try to enter Emma's inner landscape or coax her toward communication. Instead, they offered presence, sitting quietly while Emma examined a small ceramic bird that had chosen its own form of protective silence. River began to hum, not to the bird or to Emma, but to the space between them, creating a gentle bridge of sound that belonged to no one and welcomed everyone. "Your bird has built a library inside," River told Emma during their third session, their voice carrying the gentle certainty that came from deep listening. "All the quiet thoughts you've shared with it are kept there, safe and warm. Even the scared ones have comfortable chairs." Emma's eyes widened with recognition, and she whispered her first complete sentence in months. "It remembers the good dreams, too." Word spread through Dr. Chen's network, and soon River was working with other children whose inner worlds bore the complex architecture of survival. There was Leo, clutching a threadbare teddy bear with one missing eye, who hadn't spoken since a sudden move had uprooted everything familiar. River held the bear gently, sensing within its worn fabric not just memories of love, but echoes of Leo's own landscape, a world of shifting shadows and sudden loud noises, but also a tiny flickering campfire of courage and a secret spring of quiet hope. Maya began creating what they called healing maps, paintings that translated these children's inner territories into visual celebrations of resilience, showing not trauma, but the incredible ways that wounded hearts learn to protect themselves while maintaining secret gardens where hope could grow in safety. These became tools for recognition, allowing children to see their own strength reflected in colors that honored rather than pitied their complex emotional geographies. Sage, drawing on their growing understanding of psychology, would often sit nearby during sessions, offering quiet affirmations that reinforced River's approach. "You're not telling them what to feel," Sage observed one afternoon, watching River commune with a cracked recorder that played only whispered notes. "You're showing them what's already there." Ezra taught River grounding techniques essential for this deeper work. "When you leave a world, leave a light on," he said, showing them rituals both practical and tender. "Wash hands, 3 breaths by the open door. Look at the sky and name one color it is, one color it could be. Return what you borrow. Even attention has to go home and rest." River learned that their role with these children was not to heal in any dramatic sense, but to witness and validate the profound territories of the human heart. Each young soul taught them something new about the courage required to tend wounded worlds with infinite patience and unconditional love. Some children wanted their objects gently awakened. Others wished only for their silence to be honored as sacred territory. Luna transformed the shop's rhythm to accommodate this work, placing a small sign by the door that simply read, "Soft Hours." The space adopted a new kind of quiet, chosen, like the ceramic birds, but open at the edges for people who needed shelter. Parents learned to sit in chairs by the west wall, practicing not reaching for explanations while Luna kept the kettle full and her voice low. A gentle weather inside the room. One afternoon, as golden light slanted through windows, Emma approached River with a cloudy snow globe, asking if they could help her see what lived inside the murky water. River held the globe gently, sensing the underwater city that thrived in the unclear depths, not diminished by the cloudiness, but made mysterious and beautiful by it, like an ancient civilization that had learned to flourish in twilight. "It's not broken," River told Emma, watching understanding bloom across her face. "It's just private. Sometimes the most beautiful worlds need a little mystery to stay safe." That evening, River sat surrounded by Maya's healing maps, understanding that their gift had evolved beyond personal practice into something approaching ministry, a form of sacred service that honored the complex geographies of human experience. They were learning that healing, like love, was a form of world-building that required not force but presence, not solutions but recognition, not fixing, but the infinite patience to sit with wounded things until they remembered their own capacity for wholeness. The ceramic bird continued its peaceful rest on Luna's shelf, and River visited it each evening, not to awaken, but to offer gratitude for teaching them that some of the most profound healing happened in the spaces where witness met reverence, where patience learned to serve rather than solve. The sacred work with wounded children had deepened River's understanding of their calling beyond anything they had previously imagined. each gentle session reinforcing that their gift existed not for personal gain, but as a bridge between silence and recognition. It was this growing certainty that prepared them for the morning when Mr. Vale arrived at Luna's shop, carrying with him the particular energy of someone who moved through the world collecting rather than communing. He appeared during the quiet hour when morning light painted everything, in shades of honey and possibility, his expensive coat and calculating smile marking him as someone who saw value where others saw wonder. His presence felt like a sudden shift in atmospheric pressure, and River sensed immediately that this visitor carried intentions that had nothing to do with healing or reverence for sleeping worlds. I represent a consortium of collectors who have heard remarkable things about your abilities, Mr. Vale said, his voice carrying the smooth precision of someone accustomed to negotiating acquisitions. He placed a leather portfolio on Luna's worn wooden counter, its brass fittings gleaming with the particular shine that came from objects valued more for their price than their stories. We have items of considerable worth that have gone silent over the years. The financial benefit of restoration would be extraordinary. River felt Maya's hand find theirs beneath the table, a gentle anchor as wrongness filled the room like smoke. Through the shop's windows, they could see Sage approaching with their usual unhurried pace, but even at a distance, River sensed their friends' awareness that something had shifted in the sanctuary. They had all helped create. Mr. Vale opened his portfolio to reveal photographs that made River's heart ache. A music box crafted for Russian nobility, its gold leaf worn thin by decades of exile. Pocket watches that had once belonged to railroad magnates, their faces clouded with the particular sadness that came from measuring time for those who had forgotten how to savor it. Ceramic figurines whose painted smiles couldn't hide the exhaustion in their tiny glazed eyes. Each piece has been authenticated and appraised, Mr. Vale continued, sliding documents across the table with practiced efficiency. The combined value approaches 7 figures, but only if they can be made to function again. We're prepared to offer you a percentage that would ensure your financial security for life. The silence that followed felt charged with possibilities that could reshape everything. River looked at the photographs and felt the distant echo of each object's inner world, not sleeping peacefully like the ceramic bird, but exhausted from being handled by those who saw only monetary value, their spirits worn thin by decades of being treated as investments rather than treasures. River thought of Emma's cloudy snow globe, of Leo's threadbare bear, of the woman whose music box they had honored with a hummed lullaby instead of forced awakening. They remembered Ezra's teaching about consent being first, patience second, discernment third. The offer before them violated every principle they had learned to hold sacred. No, River said quietly, the word emerging with the gentle certainty that came from deep alignment with their true purpose. These aren't just objects to me. They're worlds, and worlds aren't for sale. Mr. Vale's expression shifted from practiced charm to something harder, more calculating. Perhaps you don't understand the magnitude of what I'm offering. This could change your entire life. You could establish a proper business, expand your reach significantly. My reach is already exactly what it needs to be, River replied, feeling strength flow from sources they hadn't known they possessed, from Luna's steady presence, from Maya's supportive touch, from every child who had trusted them with their wounded inner worlds. Maya spoke for the first time since Mr. Vale's arrival, her voice carrying quiet authority. What you're describing isn't expansion, it's exploitation. River's gift isn't a service to be purchased, it's a sacred trust. Sage appeared in the doorway at that moment, their storm-gray eyes taking in the scene with quick assessment. Without saying a word, they moved to stand beside River, their presence adding weight to the gentle but unmovable resistance building in the room. Mr. Vale gathered his photographs with brisk efficiency. You're making a mistake, he said, his earlier charm evaporating entirely. Gifts like yours don't come along often. That's exactly why I can't sell it, River said, understanding flooding through them like sunrise after the longest night. The moment I start selling my gift, it stops being a gift and becomes a commodity. And commodities can't hear the difference between a music box that wants to sing and one that needs to rest. After Mr. Vale left, the shop settled back into its natural rhythm, like a disturbed pond finding its calm surface again. That evening, as they processed the magnitude of what had transpired, River and their chosen family began discussing practical solutions. Dr. Chen mentioned small grants tucked into research budgets. Maya suggested creating prints of her healing maps. Sage proposed writing about their work for the town paper. "The work will support itself," River said with quiet confidence as they visited the ceramic bird before bed, not to awaken, but to offer gratitude for teaching them that some treasures were too precious to be sold. That true wealth lay not in what could be accumulated, but in what could be given freely, and that the most profound magic happened when power learned to serve love rather than profit. In their notebook that night, River drew new constellations connecting integrity to abundance, understanding finally that choosing purpose over profit didn't diminish their capacity to serve. It expanded it infinitely, creating space for the kind of work that could only flourish when tended by hands that remained forever open. The clarity that came from refusing. Mr. Vale's offer settled into River's bones like morning light, finding its permanent place in familiar windows, each day reinforcing that they had chosen correctly when they chose purpose over profit. The shop's rhythm returned to its natural cadence, but something had shifted. A door had opened that invited others to discover their own forms of gentle attention. The first person to approach was Mrs. Henderson, the librarian whose weathered hands had spent decades tending books that whispered stories to those who knew how to listen. She arrived on an afternoon when autumn light painted everything in shades of amber and possibility, carrying a small music box that had belonged to her grandmother. "I've watched you with the children," she said, settling into the chair Luna offered beside the window, where dust motes performed their endless ballet. "There's something in the way you listen that I recognize from my own work with books. Some stories want to be heard, others need to rest. I'd like to learn that kind of discernment." Soon others followed. Lila, a nurse whose hands had learned the weight of exhaustion. Tom, a music teacher who sensed lullabies hiding in hallway echoes. Mr. Ortega, the school custodian who treated door hinges like old friends. Jun, a quiet teenager who collected lost buttons like constellations. They gathered in the sun-drenched back room, drawn by something they couldn't name but recognized in their hearts. River developed what they thought of not as curriculum, but as invitation. They began with breath, because everything good did. 3 slow inhalations like opening shutters, 3 exhalations like laying blankets back down. On the 4th breath, River taught, echoing Ezra's gentle instruction, notice the seam where wanting to hear turns into hearing. Stop there. That doorway is where worlds meet. Maya guided participants through translating their inner perceptions into external forms, not necessarily paintings, but whatever medium felt authentic. Some found their insights expressed through poetry, others through movement, still others through careful arrangement of found objects. "The language doesn't matter," Maya would explain, her hands moving with conductor's grace. "What matters is the sincerity of the listening." Sage, now pursuing psychology studies, helped establish ethical frameworks. "We're not therapists," they would remind the group during each session. "We're cultivators of attention. Our role is to witness and validate, not to diagnose or treat." The practice evolved into 4 gentle movements: arrival, asking, listening, returning. Each session began with washing hands and settling into breath. Then came the careful approach to sleeping things, objects chosen not for their value, but for their willingness to be witnessed. The listening required patience that wasn't waiting, but presence. Finally, the return. Hands washed again, 3 breaths by the open door, naming one color the sky was and one it might become tomorrow. Not every moment went smoothly. One rainy afternoon, Tom, eager and tender, leaned too quickly toward a violet music box, his fingers brushing the key with well-meaning haste. Nothing happened. In the not happening, urgency entered the room like smoke. River placed their hand gently over Tom's, creating pause within pause. "When we ask," they said softly, "we let the answer take its own shape." They brought the box to the center of their circle, and everyone shifted to create more space. River told the story of the ceramic bird who had chosen quiet as sanctuary. The room softened. The box, unthreatened, offered a sound smaller than a note, enough to say, "I am here even if I do not wish to sing today." Ezra attended several sessions, his presence lending the weight of tradition. "You're creating a community of world tenders," he observed one evening, each equipped to serve in their own unique way. The workshops grew organically, Lila began evening sessions at the hospital for night shift staff. Mr. Ortega organized lunchtime practices with students who preferred libraries to cafeterias. June started meetings under the maple tree, where teenagers traded buttons like vows of remembering. Dr. Chen secured modest grants that allowed them to offer workshops freely. Maya's healing maps began appearing in therapy offices and children's hospitals, each one an invitation to recognize the complex beauty of inner landscapes. The foundation they established grew not through wealthy collectors, but through small donations from those whose lives had been touched by River's work. River moved among these tender expansions with the humility of someone watering gardens they hadn't planted. Their role became less about doing and more about holding center, returning again and again to the ground of breath and consent, tuning their presence to serve as reliable instrument in other hands. As autumn deepened, River understood their gift had evolved beyond personal practice into something approaching ministry. Not religious, but in the deeper meaning of service to something larger than themselves. Each Tuesday evening, watching students practice deep listening, River felt the profound satisfaction of seeds planted in fertile ground. In their notebook that night, River drew new constellations connecting not just objects and inner worlds, but the vast network of souls learning to tend overlooked corners, where healing gathered like light in forgotten windows. They were discovering that the most profound gifts multiplied when shared freely, creating communities of practice that could hold more wonder than any individual practitioner ever could alone. The community of world tenders had found its rhythm through autumn's golden weeks, each Tuesday gathering deepening their collective understanding of how attention could become blessing. But as seasons turned with their ancient precision, River began noticing changes in Ezra that arrived not as dramatic shifts, but with the subtle certainty of autumn settling into winter. His movements through the shop grew more deliberate, his breathing requiring deeper pauses between words, and his silver hair seemed to hold more light than usual, as if preparing for some luminous release. River sensed these alterations not as decline, but as transformation. The way winter wasn't death, but a different form of aliveness requiring new kinds of attention. Ezra's presence was becoming less dense but more luminous, like morning mist that held the essence of the lake even as it prepared to join the sky. The body is also a world, Ezra said one afternoon, as golden light filtered through windows to paint everything in shades of honey and remembrance. His voice carried the same gentle authority it always had, but now with an undertone that spoke of someone preparing for a different kind of journey. And like all worlds, it has its own seasons, its own rhythms of expansion and rest. River felt the familiar stirring that came from approaching sacred territory, understanding that their mentor was offering a final lesson in the most profound application of their shared calling. Ezra was teaching them to tend the transition between visible and invisible realms, to recognize that death itself was simply another form of geography, requiring the same reverence they brought to music boxes and ceramic birds. There's a geography to every ending, Ezra explained, his hands resting on a pocket watch that had chosen permanent silence. People think it's a cliff. It's not. It's shoreline. The tide goes out. We don't chase the water. We wave. He guided River through rituals as simple as breath, a palm over the heart, 3 slow inhalations, 3 exhalations, then a soft wordless hum that acknowledged what had been and what was becoming. Maya began creating what she called transition maps, watercolor, paintings that captured the delicate beauty of souls preparing to cross between realms. These weren't somber images, but celebrations of the courage required to release familiar forms while maintaining essential essence. In her paintings, Ezra appeared as a figure of light gradually merging with landscapes of infinite possibility, his clockmaker's tools transforming into instruments of cosmic timing. Sage, drawing on their psychology studies, helped River understand the grief that accompanied such profound witnessing. "You're not just losing a mentor," they explained during one of their walks under the maple tree. "You're being initiated into the deepest mystery of your calling, how to tend souls in transition." Luna became Ezra's primary caregiver with the gentle efficiency of someone who understood that tending was both practical and sacred. She prepared meals that honored his changing needs, arranged pillows that supported his increasing desire for rest, and maintained the shop's rhythm in ways that allowed Ezra to participate when energy permitted. The Tuesday workshops evolved to include what Ezra called threshold, tending, learning to offer presence to those approaching major life transitions. River taught the group to recognize the particular quality of attention required when souls were preparing to expand beyond familiar boundaries, whether through death, birth, profound loss, or spiritual awakening. As winter's first snow began dusting the windows with crystalline patterns, Ezra placed his worn leather case of silent timepieces in River's hands. "These will be your teachers now," he said, his voice carrying the gentle authority of someone who had learned to trust the great rhythms that governed all existence. Not because they need fixing, but because they hold the wisdom of time itself. When Ezra's final moment arrived, it came not as struggle, but as the gentlest of exhalations, like a leaf falling from a tree in perfect autumn. River sat beside him with Maya, Sage, and Luna, each person tending a corner of the room's sacred quiet. They did what they had been taught, breathed, listened, named the sky's color when the light shifted. River hummed once, a thread of melody that had no beginning or end, only middle. The room's center changed location as gently as a sleeping person turning to the other side. River felt something familiar and entirely new, a widening that asked for nothing, a presence not contained by walls or watches, an understanding that Ezra hadn't disappeared, but had simply moved into a different world, one that River now knew how to tend with the same reverence they brought to sleeping things. They opened the window. Sage whispered the color the sky was, and the color it could be tomorrow. Maya placed Ezra's loop beside the silent watch, like leaving a seashell on a shore that would remember. Luna smoothed the blanket with hands that had taught comfort its own language. That evening, River visited the ceramic bird on Luna's shelf, not to awaken, but to offer gratitude for teaching them that some of the most profound healing happened in the spaces where witness met reverence, where patience learned to serve the great conversation between form and formlessness that underlay all existence. They were learning that mastery meant not just tending objects and wounded hearts, but serving as bridges for souls navigating the ultimate transition, holding space for the infinite geography, where endings became beginnings and love learned to transcend every boundary. The grief that followed Ezra's gentle departure moved through. River like winter light, learning to become spring, not harsh but clarifying, revealing the essential architecture of everything they had learned together. In the weeks after his passing, River found themselves carrying his leather case of silent timepieces, not as memorial, but as living compass, each watch pointing toward the deeper understanding that their work was meant to expand beyond the shop's familiar walls into something. Approaching Sanctuary, Maya had been walking the town's quieter streets with artist's eyes, cataloging forgotten spaces where wonder gathered like light in abandoned windows. When she appeared at Luna's shop on a morning painted in tentative greens and possibility gold, her vision arrived already fully formed, as if it had been growing in the spaces between their shared breaths. "What if we created a permanent place?" she said, settling beside River where dust motes performed their endless ballet in the morning light, not just for workshops, but a true sanctuary where people could come to remember their own capacity for wonder. A place where invisible and visible worlds could meet openly. River felt the familiar stirring that came from recognizing the next movement in a symphony they had been composing without realizing it. The idea resonated in their chest like a tuning fork struck against the deepest truth they carried, that their gift existed not for individual practice but as part of a larger conversation between souls seeking connection with the sacred dimensions of ordinary existence. They found the space behind the old library, where an abandoned greenhouse waited with windows clouded by years of patient weather. When Luna unlocked the iron gate, recognition moved through them like a tide returning to familiar shore. The conservatory breathed differently than any building they had entered. Glass ribs catching light like a cathedral, designed by someone who understood that sacred architecture should amplify rather than contain the natural world's gentle teachings. The transformation happened with the same organic rhythm that governed all their work. Mr. Ortega brought ladders and the kind of jokes that never pushed too hard. John arranged found buttons along window ledges until colors looked like soft weather patterns. Lila scrubbed glass in circles that moved with devotional precision, while Dr. Chen sorted cushions into configurations that invited rest rather than posture. They cleaned slowly, honoring each cobweb as story and every fallen leaf as note from seasons past. Maya's artistic vision shaped the greenhouse into interconnected environments, each dedicated to different facets of world tending. One section held music boxes, arranged on low wooden stands that invited sitting and patient listening. Another displayed her healing maps, watercolor windows onto inner landscapes that helped visitors recognize echoes of their own emotional geographies. River's quiet alcove housed Ezra's timepieces, each one a silent teacher in the art of threshold tending. They named it the Observatory of Small Things, not because it sought to capture stars, but because it acknowledged that entire galaxies lived in pocket watches, ceramic birds and the quiet spaces between two people, breathing in synchrony. The name felt right in the mouth, soft, round, honest as morning light through clouded glass. The opening came not with fanfare, but with the gentle ceremony River had learned to trust. They established practices as simple as breath: wash hands before and after, ask with presence rather than insistence, let things be as they choose, leave light on when departing. Luna placed a kettle where steam could rise like small clouds, teaching volunteers the precise patience of cocoa stirred until it remembered how to comfort. The observatory evolved organically into multiple offerings. Morning hours welcomed individual contemplation among sleeping things. Afternoon workshops introduced newcomers to deep listening techniques. Evening gatherings allowed the growing community of world tenders to share discoveries and support each other's expanding practice. River's role transformed from direct practitioner to gentle facilitator, understanding that their task was maintaining the space's essential reverence while allowing each visitor to discover their own authentic relationship with wonder. Pilgrims began arriving from neighboring towns, drawn by something they described as the sound of silence learning to sing, souls approaching transitions, seeking deeper meaning in daily existence. Sage developed educational programs introducing children to gentle attention, while Lila brought hospital staff for breathing sessions under glass during their breaks. Maya established artist residencies, inviting creators to translate their discoveries among sleeping things into forms that could be shared. The resulting works filled the observatory with constantly evolving galleries of invisible worlds made visible. As autumn painted the world in shades of gold and letting go, River understood they had created something unprecedented, not business or organization, but living sanctuary where ancient world-tending practices could flourish in contemporary form. The ceramic bird continued its peaceful rest in a place of honor, and River visited it each morning, not to awaken but to offer gratitude for teaching them that individual gifts multiplied not through promotion, but practice, creating ripples of awareness that spread like seeds on wind, taking root wherever hearts were ready to remember their own capacity for tending the vast, interconnected mystery that surrounded them all. In their notebook each evening, River drew new constellations mapping the network of connections radiating from their small sanctuary, lines reaching into hospitals and schools, therapy offices and private homes, anywhere someone had learned to approach the world with the reverence of a visitor, in sacred space, understanding finally that the most profound magic happened when solitary practice expanded into collective healing. Years had settled around River like morning light, finding its permanent place in familiar windows, each season deepening their understanding of the delicate balance between intervention and reverence. The observatory of small things breathed with its own rhythm now, a living sanctuary where the boundaries between visible and invisible worlds had grown gossamer thin. River moved through the glass-ribbed space with the contemplative presence of someone who had learned to navigate hidden geographies with the fluency of a native speaker. Their gift had evolved beyond specific techniques into something approaching pure presence. River could sense the health of entire inner ecosystems without touching anything, standing at the threshold of a display and feeling how one music box's memory springs held gentle contentment, while another's clockwork dancers preferred the silver quiet of chosen rest. They had learned to tune the room's atmosphere the way careful hands might tune a beloved instrument, not to achieve perfection, but to maintain harmony with the vast, self-sustaining mystery that surrounded them all. The observatory had become what Maya once envisioned, a true pilgrimage site where souls could remember their own capacity for wonder. Morning light filtered through greenhouse glass to illuminate Maya's healing maps, now covering entire walls with watercolor celebrations of inner landscapes. Sage's psychology students gathered in afternoon circles, learning that empathy began with the kind of deep listening River had spent years cultivating. Luna's kettle whispered its gentle steam, while Jun arranged found objects according to patterns only he could perceive, each placement creating subtle shifts in the room's emotional weather. It was during one of these quiet afternoons that River first noticed the approaching presence of the next generation. Young Luna, Sage's daughter, named for River's adoptive grandmother, moved through the observatory with careful attention that felt both familiar and entirely new. Where River communed with sleeping objects, and Ezra had tended thresholds between realms, Luna's sensitivity extended to the emotional landscapes of living beings. "I can feel what people have been feeling," Luna explained during her first session, her voice carrying the particular gravity that came from recognizing gifts larger than the self that held them. "When someone sits in that chair by the window, I know if they were sad or hopeful or confused. The air remembers their hearts." River felt the familiar stirring that came from witnessing new forms of world-tending emerge. "Every form of deep attention is sacred," they told Luna, settling beside her where afternoon light painted everything in honey-gold patterns. "The world needs many different kinds of tenders. Your gift with living hearts is as precious as any. Communion with sleeping things." Maya began creating what she called empathy maps for Luna, watercolor translations of emotional weather patterns that helped the young woman understand the complex territories she was learning to navigate. Sage established ethical frameworks, teaching Luna that feeling others' emotions carried both gift and responsibility. That witness was sacred, but boundaries were essential. River's role transformed once again, from practitioner to something approaching elder, someone whose primary function was holding space for others to discover their own authentic relationships with wonder. Their greatest skill had become knowing when not to intervene, when to simply sit in appreciation of the self-sustaining intelligence that governed all Sue's existence. This wisdom revealed itself most clearly when a young woman arrived carrying a small wooden bird that had belonged to her grandmother. "It's never sung," she said, hope and sorrow braided together in her voice. "I'm afraid its song might be lost forever." River held the carved bird gently, sensing its rich inner life, not a world of melody, but of profound, quiet storytelling. "It doesn't sing with notes," River told her softly, "but with stories. It holds the whisper of every secret your grandmother ever told it, every quiet dream she held in her heart. It's a library of whispers, not a concert hall." The woman's eyes filled with tears of recognition. She hadn't needed the bird to sing. She had needed to know its quiet held meaning. River understood then, more deeply than ever, that their role was not to impose understanding, but to reveal the inherent wisdom already present in every silent thing, every quiet heart. As evening painted the greenhouse in shades of gold and purple, River sat among Ezra's timepieces in their quiet alcove. The observatory hummed gently around them, soft melodies from awakened music boxes, the whispered conversations of visitors discovering their own capacity for wonder, the silver silence of objects choosing their own forms of rest. River felt their own inner world expanding to embrace everything they had touched and been touched by. They were no longer simply a cartographer of hidden spaces, but a living bridge between realms, their presence itself a form of blessing for the countless worlds that flourished in the spaces between heartbeats. The ceramic bird continued its peaceful rest, and River visited it each evening, not to awaken, but to offer gratitude for teaching them that mastery meant serving the great conversation between form and formlessness, between what was and what was always becoming. In their notebook that night, River drew new constellations, mapping not just objects and inner worlds, but the vast network of souls learning to tend the infinite gardens that bloomed wherever reverence met recognition, understanding finally that their true legacy lived in the cultivation of wonder itself. Young Luna's gift unfolded like morning light, learning to paint familiar windows, each day revealing new depths in her ability to perceive the emotional landscapes that lived and breathed around every human heart. The observatory had become her natural habitat, where she moved with the careful reverence River recognized in their own approach to sleeping things. But where River communed with the inner worlds of objects, Luna's sensitivity extended to the vast, shifting geographies of feeling that people carried like invisible weather systems. River watched with the quiet satisfaction of a gardener observing seedlings discover their own relationship with sunlight as Luna developed. What she called heart-tending, she had learned to sit near the observatory's entrance, not speaking, but simply allowing the currents of human emotion to flow around her like gentle tides. When visitors carried heavy burdens, Luna would instinctively reach for one of the smooth river stones June had arranged along the windowsills, tracing its cool surface as if seeking an anchor in the storm of feeling. The breakthrough came on an afternoon when golden light painted everything in shades of forgiveness. A man arrived carrying a paper-wrapped sandwich he couldn't bring himself to eat, his sleeves rolled as if prepared for work he couldn't name. The moment he settled into the chair by the west window, Luna felt grief gather around her shoulders like autumn rain, not overwhelming, but steady weather that had been faithful for years. Luna looked to River with eyes wide with recognition, and River nodded toward the practices they had established like stepping stones across swift water. Wash hands. 3 breaths that opened shutters, 3 that laid blankets back down. Name the sky's color, soft blue with milky threads, and one it might become tomorrow, periwinkle if Mercy remembered morning. When Luna returned, the grief remained present but stood beside her rather than behind her eyes. She chose a seat 1 chair over from the man, a small act of kindness that left space for choice rather than intrusion. Sometimes people bring sandwiches to remind themselves they can still be hungry, Luna said quietly, more to the room than to him. River watched the man's hand tighten, then loosen on the wax paper. No tears, but a visible settling. River brought over a small music box that had never agreed to sing, but loved being held for its warmth, placing it on the table between them like a neutral hearth. She liked things that hummed, the man said finally, his voice sounding surprised to hear itself in air. Said humming gave sorrow something to lean on. Luna didn't reach for his sorrow. She reached for the hum. Softly. No melody, only a tone that could carry without speaking for anyone. River joined with low, steady presence, the way you might hold a ladder while someone remembers how to climb. Maya, painting in her corner, added gentle arcs to wet paper, shapes like hands at rest, a small doorway of pale gold. When the man left with his untouched sandwich and Maya's quiet painting, Luna smiled without knowing she was smiling. I felt it leave me, she said. Like weather changing without wind. You're learning the most important lesson, River told her as they cleaned the table together. You are a shoreline, not a sponge. Let feelings touch you and withdraw. Witness the tide without carrying the water. Maya began creating what she called emotional weather maps for Luna, watercolor translations that helped the young woman understand the complex territories she was learning to navigate. Sage established gentle frameworks, teaching Luna that feeling others' emotions carried both gift and responsibility. That witness was sacred, but boundaries were essential. As autumn deepened, River's role had transformed from active practitioner to contemplative presence, understanding that their true legacy lay not in the specific worlds they had awakened, but in the cultivation of reverence itself, the recognition that everything deserved to be seen, listened to and loved in its own unique way. One evening, when the greenhouse breathed in shades of indigo and gold, River opened a small velvet pouch and placed a worn brass key in Luna's palm. It held the faint warmth of countless dawns and the memory of mornings when silence spoke clearest. This opened the art room before the building learned to buzz, River said, remembering dust motes like galaxies and their first maps of listening itself. It unlocked the hour when things spoke most clearly. I think it's time it found your hand. Luna studied the key with reverence, understanding she was receiving story rather than object. What does it open now? She asked. The day, River answered, and the word felt complete, the quiet before voices arrive, the part of morning where feelings arrange their chairs before anyone sits down. Later that night, River visited the ceramic bird in its place of honor, not to awaken, but to offer gratitude for teaching them that some of the most profound magic happened when individual gifts multiplied through generous sharing. They thought of Luna's young steadiness, Maya's patient translations, Sage's careful boundaries, Ezra everywhere and nowhere like timepiece and tide. In their notebook, River drew a new constellation, 3 small stars and a long curve like shoreline. It looked like inheritance but gentler, as if passed by candlelight rather than ceremony. They were guiding the next tender, not by handing over maps but by helping her remember. She carried navigation within her own heart, understanding finally that their calling had evolved beyond personal practice into something approaching sacred succession, where wonder learned to tend itself across generations of patient, loving hands. Evening settled around the original back room of Luna's curiosity shop like a familiar prayer, the space now transformed into a meditation sanctuary where the boundaries between inner and outer worlds had grown gossamer thin. Years had painted everything with the particular patina that comes from being genuinely loved, dust motes that danced with purpose, shadows that held stories, and an atmosphere so thoroughly infused with gentle attention that time itself seemed to move like honey poured slowly. River sat among the original music boxes and sleeping treasures, their hands resting on the worn wooden table, where they had first learned the difference between listening and hearing. The ceramic bird maintained its chosen silence on the familiar shelf, a faithful teacher in the art of honored rest. Around them, the accumulated wisdom of a lifetime spent in service to overlooked wonders hummed with collective contentment. Each object, holding not just its own inner world but echoes of every gentle encounter River had facilitated. Maya appeared in the doorway, carrying 2 cups of tea that steamed like small clouds, her hair now threaded with silver that caught light, like captured moonbeams. She settled beside River with the comfortable ease of 2 souls who had learned to build worlds together, their love having grown through seasons of shared wonder into something as essential as breathing. Luna's found her rhythm, Maya said simply, her words carrying recognition rather than announcement. Through the window, they could see the observatory of small things breathing with its own gentle life, young Luna moving through the glass-ribbed space with the fluid presence of someone who had learned to be a shoreline, rather than a sponge for human emotion. River nodded, feeling the profound satisfaction that comes from witnessing seeds planted in fertile ground discover their own relationship with sunlight. They thought of Luna's unwavering love that had been the earth in which their gift could take root, teaching them that every object was once loved by someone, and that love leaves traces like fingerprints on the soul of things. They remembered Ezra's silver wisdom, guiding them through the delicate art of threshold tending, showing that death itself was simply another form of geography, requiring the same reverence they brought to. Sleeping music boxes, Sage's steady witness had been the gentle translation that helped others. To understand River didn't fix things, they simply reminded them of their own capacity for wonder. And now young Luna carried the torch of reverence into new generations, her gift with emotional landscapes, expanding the ancient tradition of world tending into territories River had never imagined. It was never about the objects themselves, River said, their voice carrying the particular gravity that comes from understanding accumulated over decades of patient practice. They were teachers, showing us that everything, absolutely everything, deserves to be seen and loved exactly as it chooses to be. As twilight painted the room in shades of lavender and gold, River felt their own inner world expanding, not to encompass everything, but to recognize their place within the vast, interconnected web of consciousness that linked every sleeping thing to every awakened heart. They had learned that true mastery wasn't about power or control, but about presence and permission, the wisdom to know when to awaken and when to let sleeping things lie, honoring every choice with equal reverence. River's hands came to rest on the first music box that had ever responded to their listening, so many years ago when they were still learning the language of gentle attention. As their consciousness drifted toward its inner world, they felt not just the familiar landscape of miniature dancers and clockwork hearts, but something infinitely larger, the vast network of all the worlds they had ever tended, all the souls they had ever witnessed, all the quiet corners where wonder had been cultivated like light in forgotten windows. They began to hum, not to the music box or to the room, but to the space between heartbeats where all worlds met and recognized each other. The melody had no beginning or end, only the eternal middle where patience learned to serve love rather than time. The music box responded with its own gentle song, and soon the entire room filled with a harmony that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. A lullaby that reminded everyone within its reach that they were both the cartographers and the territory, both the tender and the tended, both the dreamer and the dream. River felt themselves becoming less a person who tended worlds and more a gentle presence moving through layers of reality, their consciousness expanding like morning light until it embraced everything they had touched and been touched by. They didn't disappear or ascend. They simply continued, a living bridge between realms, their presence itself a form of blessing for the countless worlds that flourished in the spaces between attention and neglect. The ceramic bird watched from its chosen quiet, and River, who had long ago stopped needing every mystery solved, offered one final bow in the direction of its beautiful rest. They understood finally that their true legacy lived not in specific worlds awakened, but in the cultivation of reverence itself, the recognition that love was the ultimate form of world-building, creating spaces where wonder could flourish across generations of patient, caring hands. And with that understanding, they stretched into the stars, becoming as vast and gentle as the night sky itself, still tending, still listening, still offering the kind of patient attention that reminded all things of their own infinite capacity for beauty. Somewhere, in the soft geography between waking and dreaming, they continue, a gentle presence napping in sunlight, humming lullabies to sleeping worlds, forever reminding us that everything, absolutely everything, deserves to be met with wonder. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's going to be okay.